Although they should have said English and Spanish in the title. Did that not come through in the invite?
No. Nope.
That's
oh
no
yeah,
good.
it did. You're right. See, I'm just not paying attention to details this week. That's the disadvantage of how I'm feeling. All right, here we go. All right, you got that now? Is it looking right?
It does look right. It'll take me a second to get the getting the YouTube set up here.
I'm so glad to hear I had more participants than I thought I did. It's that echo chamber effect, right? Connie, I love your message. That's awesome. I love it.
Okay, give me a second so I can get the YouTube stream going, and
You
I'll
got
come.
it.
Okay, are you ready for me to start? Do you want me to do an intro? Would you like to introduce yourself? What would be
You
best?
can do an intro. Go for it. You wanna?
Sure.
I would love it.
Hi, folks. It's Steve Hargadon, and welcome to day one of the Global Education Conference. We have back-to-back keynotes from Jennifer Klein, first in Spanish and now in English. To say that Jennifer's a friend might be stretching it a little bit. I'm a fan. I'm a big fan of Jennifer.
Good. Friends good.
She'll tell you about her work. We're really delighted to have her here again. Thank you so much, Jennifer.
My pleasure, Steve. Thank you so much. And thank you to everyone who's choosing to participate in this session. Those of you who don't know me, Jennifer Klein. I have been in education for 29 years as a teacher as well as a leader in the last few years. I worked as a consultant for many years as well. I'm currently the rectora or head of school at Gimnasio Los Caobos, which is located just north of Bogota, Colombia. Basically a suburb to the north of Bogota. I am also the founder of Principled Learning Strategies, through which I do support schools, teachers, leaders in any way that I can in the transformation of education. And I'm the author of the book, The Global Education Guidebook. And tonight I'm here to talk about the experience that we've been having, or that I've been having, trying to lead global innovation in a school that is located in a very traditional educational context. I do think it's important to start by saying that when I say that a context is traditional, that does not mean that it is a bad context at all. I think we sometimes assume, those of us who are in innovative circles can tend to assume that if it's not innovative, it must be bad. And I don't think that there is anything actually bad in a school or a culture or a system being traditional. But as times change, education obviously needs to as well. We certainly haven't gotten it perfect. We haven't figured out all the bugs. We haven't managed to solve all the challenges that have come up, but we're learning. And what I want to do today is share a little bit of our learning, both our successes and our challenges, and then specifically some of the strategies that we're using, which I hope can transfer into other contexts, particularly for those of you who are participating today, who are leaders and who are trying to lead this kind of work, perhaps in a traditional context. So I'll start with our driving question, because I'm a PBL educator and I always need to start with a question. Our question tonight is, how might we foster increasingly student-centered, globally engaged practices in traditional educational contexts? So I'll share a little bit about what I mean by a traditional educational context. Some of what I mean really is a traditional social context as well. So the Colombian context, as most of you probably know, global educators tend to know this and even to spell Colombia right, which is always a delight for me to see. We are in the midst still of a war that has been going on, a civil war that's been going on for over 50 years. This is a war with far more than just two sides. It is an incredibly complicated war that has to do to some degree with human rights and needs, but to a large degree with the needs of drug lords and that kind of thing as well, and the production of cocaine in our country. And so it's a really messy, really long war. It's very, very difficult one to solve. And I believe always that war brings with it a tendency to hold on to the traditional. So that definitely creates a challenge for us. We're also at a point where we are in a peace process, and a lot of Colombians would love to say that we are now post-conflict, but I think when we're being realistic, we're not post anything yet. We are in the process, but what we've seen in elections, as well as in the elections that had to do with the peace process itself, is that we are a heavily divided society, meaning that we have an average 50%, 50% kind of a split in almost anything that you might survey in the country. And that's because half the country still feels that we haven't solved the problem, and the other half of the country thinks it's just fine. This creates all sorts of challenges. And I'm not going to get too political in this session at all, but I am going to say that the socio-political situation definitely has a very, very direct impact on education, because it makes people all the more paranoid or fearful about the well-being of their children and what comes next and their ability to handle whatever it is that comes next. And so that can have a really direct and major impact on education. It is also a very traditional educational system in itself. All of the teacher preparation or the majority of teacher preparation that is happening in the country is highly, highly traditional. That means that all of my teachers were educated traditionally themselves and professionally prepared in traditional ways as well. That means that, when I say who experienced an education centered in students, I'm the only one in the room raising my hand. That means that we have a lot to unlearn. It means, as my teachers say, that we have to cambiar el chip, or change the chip in the brain that makes us think that education is a teacher at the front of the room giving lectures and kids taking notes in their seats in rows. We also have a very, very big challenge in what is the high stakes exam, the national exam. And the national exam is the entry point into university for our students. That means that we can't ignore it. We can't pretend that it's not important. It's much, much bigger, honestly, bigger stakes than, say, the SATs, although it has some similarities. It's bigger and higher stakes because whereas in the United States, we have the SATs, but we also have, you know, the interview and the essays, and you can submit a portfolio, and you can, you know, you can go do the interviews, and there are all these other ways that you can show who you are as a student besides numbers and grades and exams. Here, your point value on the exam really decides which universities you can choose from. And if you're right on the edge, a conversation and interview might make a difference, but so far we don't have universities that are accepting student portfolios. They're not interested in anything much more than just the number, and that creates some major challenges for non-traditional or alternative education. We also have some of the lowest PISA scores on the global level. We are at the bottom in terms of Latin America. War, I think, has a lot to do with that because it created significantly more disenfranchisement of specific communities that couldn't be reached easily, or where no teacher would be willing to go and live because of the political conflict. But the low PISA scores obviously are also an issue of national pride. And so traditional, when you've got that fear of what could happen and what it means to be at the bottom of the pile, then you tend to get more traditional practices popping up because people want to hold on to something that they believe, even if they're wrong, was more effective or feel somehow more effective. And then finally, we have the Venezuelan refugee crisis. This in itself is not necessarily a challenge to education directly, but Colombia has received at this point about 1.5 million Venezuelan refugees that we know of. This is taxing all governmental systems, governmental systems. It's also creating an increase in xenophobia, which is pretty scary to watch happen. In our own school, we're not necessarily seeing a lot of that. We're experiencing some additional bullying of Venezuelan students who come in, for example. So it does have the ripple effect in that sense. But I think more than anything else, it just means that the government system is incredibly overtaxed and does not overexhausted, overused, and is not necessarily up to the challenge. We're still a small country, and to receive that many people and they're continuing to flood in, obviously I want to see how education can help with that, but it is a challenge to our work. So George Couros says that there are 10 stories that great leaders should know how to tell and tell well. I'm not going to tell all 10 of them, certainly. I think it's a great list, so that I'm going to leave it up here for a minute. Some of them, of course, have to do with how we market our schools. Some of them have to do with how we sell our schools, how we convince people to come work for us. Some of them are the more personal leadership stories, and I can certainly say that I model my leadership after some of my most important mentors. Those mentors include Arnold Langberg in Colorado, the founder of the second experiential educational program in the United States, the Open School in Colorado outside of Denver, which is where I graduated from. I'm also guided in many important ways by the work of Judith Bannon, an expert in middle school learning, who was my boss at St. Mary's Academy in Denver for many years. So those are just a couple of examples of people who influence the way that I choose to lead. But I'm going to share 5 stories in particular briefly to give you a little bit of a grounding in caobos. And I should clarify that the word caobos is the name of a tree. It's a type of magnolia tree that grows in the area. So, and the word gimnasio is a signal that we are an open campus, meaning that not open, but a campus with countryside, a campus with big green open spaces for outdoor education. So where we came from, Caobos was founded in 1991 by a priest who was at the time the rector of one of the most important universities in Bogota, La Javariana, and a private family. And they worked together to create an education that would be founded in humanism, a humanist curriculum. It's what we call Católica Laica, which means that it is a Catholic school, but it's not a confessional school. So it is an inclusive Catholic school where we do accept students from other religions, and where there's an openness or an inclusivity to the way we think about religion. And the intention was always to build the kind of community where students were treated like human beings, and where the school would be able to contribute to the growth of the society itself, right? Would be able to create the leaders for tomorrow. This is a private school. It appeals to or draws from the very top sectors, socioeconomic sectors of the country. Interestingly enough, in Colombia, they're actually numbered very specifically. And so we're educating some of the most powerful and rich students in the country, pardon me, and we are doing so with the intention to create conscientious leaders who are connected to the people around them, who innovate not just to make money themselves, but who really innovate to try to create social change. I personally believe very, very strongly that education is an incredible means of creating social change. Why we can't stay here? Well, about 6 years ago, when the school started to suffer from some financial difficulties, but also from the changes in the society around them, it became very clear that a traditional education was not going to be the way, or the best way anyway, to create that kind of leader who thought about others, right? The kind of leader who would be able to really create, do something different, not just continue with the norms. In other words, it became clear that what we needed was a 21st century education, right? An education that was centered in the students, that developed their passions and their talents, but that also met the needs of the educational or the traditional educational system around them. The kind of education that would create leaders who thought about others, not just themselves, and all of that. So that required a shift in pedagogy. And as I said, that began about 6 years ago. The where we're going is connected, obviously, to that shift. The belief was that we needed to make significant changes, not only in the way we teach, but also in our classroom spaces. So we have, we've converted almost all of our classrooms. I think we've got about 2 more years to go still. But what we've been doing is taking out brick walls and putting in glass walls, taking away the artificial front of the classroom and turning it into a more collaborative space, getting rid of stationary desks, encouraging much more collaborative learning space design in those classrooms. And then the glass obviously also allows the students to feel connected to the world outside the classroom, but then also allows teachers, for example, to watch groups work outside, so that we don't have to always do all of the group work inside the classes, because they're not all very large spaces. My vision comes in large degree, and this is why they hired me for this role, from my own experiences. I attended a wonderful school outside of Philadelphia called the School in Rose Valley for the first years of my life. That's founded in the ideas of Grace Rotzel, founded by her, but also based in her philosophies. Grace Rotzel, I like to think of as sort of the female John Dewey, just as important, but not as well known because of being female at the time, in that time period, I should say. And then also the open school, and the way that I was educated to think about learning, to see myself as a participant or a protagonist in my own learning experiences. And then, of course, in particular terms, we're talking about project-based learning, right? And that's been a big part of it. So how we're going to get there? Project-based learning was the first pedagogical shift that was made, the reconstruction of the classrooms. All of this was designed to shift the directions of education. In a lot of ways, though, I think that a lot of those shifts were done without thinking about the way that the external community was going to view them. And I think that's really what I've ended up having to do, is kind of clean up some of the mess that comes from making those kinds of changes inside the school, while on the outside of the school, the society itself was not necessarily becoming less traditional. And what we believe that the young people we're educating are going to lead the future of the country. We believe that a young person who's had a chance to really develop their talents and really explore their sense of purpose and who they want to be and how they want to contribute, as opposed to just being educated in a cookie cutter model where every kid in theory turns out the same, except that they don't, because they're all different. That's not valuable to us, that we really want to educate young people who are destined for a million different paths. As an example, I'll say that we compiled a list of the career fields that our students who graduated last year are going into. And I was so gratified to see like 30 different career fields, maybe even more than 30 different career fields chosen by our students. For me, that's a sign that we are giving them a chance to develop their passions in our school, and that we're giving them a chance to understand what matters to them, what they're good at, how they want to contribute, and that does amazing things for them and for us in the broader society. So a few of the challenges. I was saying to Steve before we got started that I think the reason it took me 2.5 years to give this talk, frankly, is because for a good 2 years, well, maybe 1.5 years, I couldn't figure out how to talk about parents in a way that respected the experience that they have and the perspectives that they bring to the table. So I finally figured it out. I'm going to say that they're resistant parents. But what I mean by that is that they're scared of failing their kids. And I think we see this all over the world when we try to do something different. That they were educated themselves in a traditional way. It's what they know. It's something that they feel they know works, although I'm not sure that I agree with that, but I understand why they think so. And it's scary for them to step outside of that. It's scary to imagine that this education that their children are receiving is going to be what they need it to be, that it's going to get them into the right universities, that it's going to give them all that basis of knowledge that so many parents still believe is so important, even though I can pick up my phone and find most of it in 30 seconds or less. I think too, and it's not just parents, it's teachers as well. I think there's a perception of rigor as being key to academic success. And this is something that I've written about a couple of times because I really think it's such a mistake. It's almost like adults often think that if my kid comes home happy, that means they're not learning anything. It almost means that if my kid comes home not suffering and having to drill something for hours and hours or 5 hours of homework every night, that we're not educating them well. I think that's such a mistake. I think you can have a beautiful, wonderful growth experience in an educational program and still get all the right stuff, whatever the right stuff is. I really do believe that. But that perception obviously pushes back against the kinds of things we're trying to do. And we have parents who will say, not just parents, but people, especially in the first year, who would say, my kid's not doing anything, because even the kid couldn't perceive how much work was happening because the classroom was so active and enjoyable to be in. So that's a big piece of it. We also have teachers without any student-centered practices in their training or in their personal experience. And that means that they're learning something they can't even imagine because they didn't experience it themselves. That means too that we can't count on our training programs to bring us teachers who are already prepared in project-based learning because we just don't have university programs that are doing that in their preparations of teachers. We have a problem, which I think is a really common problem around the world, especially in the higher levels, secondary university, and that is the teachers who love their disciplines more than teaching. And I say this with all due respect because I think I was, I loved literature. Being a literature and English teacher, a writing teacher, I loved that. I had a lot to say about the literature too, but I think sometimes when teachers go into the field because they love their discipline more than they love kids, it can create some challenges. And again, I'm not teacher bashing, I'm not blaming them for that, but I think that those teachers have often been the hardest to transform because they see education as something very static, as something that, that where I have all this stuff that I need to share and I need to be the one to share it. And it's very difficult for them to see beyond that and to see that their kids should be the ones doing the investigating, that their kids could be the ones coming up with a right answer or developing something completely new that's threatening or it's challenging for them. And then finally, the high stakes exam context. And I will say I'm watching the questions over on the side, but in the interest of making sure that I complete everything, I'm not responding to them right now, but I love the questions that I'm seeing, and thank you, and the comments. Thank you so much for being active and participants. I really do appreciate it. The high stakes exam context obviously has high stakes for students, right? As a couple of you have said in the chat, it's very sad that they won't accept portfolios. We're going to get them there though. I think and I'll explain some of the strategies we're using later, but I think we will get them to that point. But it has very high stakes for the universities that the students will be able to even consider. And our kids do go to the top 5 or 6 universities in the country, as well as studying in the external world. And so we definitely have to make sure that their exam scores are as high as humanly possible. It also, though, has stakes for the school. And this is something that I have not seen in the past in other countries. Our school rankings, obviously, depend on this. And there's a magazine that every fall, it should be coming out shortly, every fall they rank all of the schools based on their exam scores. So if you're not in the top 100, you're not even going to show up in the news, in the article. You're not going to be listed as the best schools in the country. And it has a major impact then too on our enrollment, obviously, because families will see that list in the magazine and make decisions based on it to a large degree. But it also has an impact on our ability to set our costs. And this is something I have never seen elsewhere, meaning that what we can charge families is based on how well we did in ICFES during the year. And so basically that exam, sorry, I keep using that term ICFES, that's the way, what it's called, or Prueba Saber is the national exam. If we have a low year in ICFES, we can't raise the prices as much. If we have a really great year, we can raise the prices more. I'm not a fan of really high cost education or anything, but it does impact our working budget very directly because we are a for-profit school, not a nonprofit school, which means that we can't fundraise other ways than through tuition. So when it comes to the strategies and the successes we've seen, before we get into that, I did want to make that distinction between rigor and vigor. And this was a distinction that was made to me by Arnie Langberg when I was about 16, actually. And so it's become the heart of how I think about education, honestly. We so often hear teachers and people in education use this term rigor like it's the golden star in the north. But when we look at what the word means, it's not the right word for education. In my opinion, it's a very wrong word, in fact, for describing education, because it means rigidity or firmness. And in fact, the word in Latin that it comes from means directly inflexibility or rigidity. Rigor mortis is what happens after someone passes away. It's not what I believe a good education looks like. I do think, though, that we can create an education that's vigorous, that's based in vigor, in energy, and living force, that's based in effort, energy, and enthusiasm, where students are full of life, as the Latin term suggests. And I think we can still reach the same goals, and I think we can still reach the same high level of work, but we can do it in a way that makes sense, that's enjoyable, that's about students loving every second of it. And yes, doing some things that make them miserable, but in the service of something that they care about. I often use my Spanish as an example. I drilled Spanish verbs and conjugations for years to get them right. None of that was fun, but it was all motivated by something that was much more centered in vigor than it was in rigor. So some of our successes took me 2 full years, but I managed to get rid of the bells. We now have a culture of teaching and learning where students and teachers generally are getting to class on time without our having to have bells. I really appreciate that. I think that the prison system is what works by bells, and I don't think that school systems should have to. We have one significant interdisciplinary project per trimester at every single grade level. That means that students have interdisciplinary learning experiences from very, very young as 4 years old, and I'll show examples of those in a little bit. We have been able to make some significant shifts toward vigor in our language about learning and language about education and teaching, so that teachers are much more focused on engaging them in a vigorous way than in a rigorous way. Teachers are also slowly becoming willing to experiment more, and we've seen a slow disappearance of a culture of fear, which was what I encountered when I first arrived 2.5 years ago. I was actually quite surprised by how fearful the teachers were of trying new things, and I quickly discovered that they were all just scared to lose their jobs. And it was so far outside of what they were used to, what they were being asked to do, that that a lot of them were really paralyzed, and weren't trying new things because they were sure that at some point we were going to change our minds and go back to the old way, and that they didn't really even know how to ensure success in this new way. So we've been able to see that change. We've also been able to create an increasingly constructive and collaborative parent culture. It's taken a lot of work, and it's taken a mindset change on my part completely. But we've been able to make some really important strides. And again, I'll share the strategies behind these successes as we go. We've also been able to improve the alignment between our projects and academic indicators. This is something those of you who are in project-based schools or student-centered pedagogies of other kinds know is one of the biggest tricks, is to make sure that the projects actually do align to whatever the curricular standards need to be. And when I arrived, I didn't find that that was true. I found that a lot of the projects were based on cool and interesting ideas, but they weren't actually aligned to the curricular expectations of the grade level or discipline. So that's been a major, major change that we've been working really hard on together. And then finally, we've managed to increase, although we need to still increase it further, the emphasis on narrative evaluation, which would be the self-evaluation, the peer evaluation, the teacher evaluation, all of that in a more narrative and formative form over just letter and number grades. For example, when I arrived, the only students that were getting narrative comments were those who were failing and doing very poorly. And now students who are doing very well also receive, like all students receive, narrative evaluation and have multiple opportunities in the classroom as well to evaluate themselves and their peers and to reflect on their learning and their needs. So a few project examples. It's always good to be able to imagine it in action. This was a project that was done in pre-kinder. So the 4-year-olds and 5-year-olds did this project. The driving question was, how can we create an organic infirmary to help sick kids at Kaobos? We have national laws that prohibit the nurse from giving any kind of medicine to younger children. Only, I think it starts at maybe 15 or something that they're able to give a little bit more medicine. I'm not sure exactly the age, but this is a major problem. It means that the only thing the infirmary can do when a younger child arrives at their office sick is call the parents and make them a cup of tea. And so what the students did was they learned about plants and medicinal plants and that kind of thing in the area. And they created these little books, as you can see in the picture, but then they also created a little garden for the nurse, which now lives in the infirmary and which allows her, when a kid comes in with a specific ailment, to choose the plant that would be the most appropriate plant to make into tea. So they still receive tea, but it's obviously a bit better at solving their health challenges. This one comes from, I believe it was 6th and 7th grade last year. And I should clarify that above kindergarten, our grades are one number off. So our 6th grade would be US 7th grade. And our seniors are 11th graders, right? The last year. They're the same age as seniors in the United States, but because we have one additional year between kinder and 1st grade, all the numbers get offset, just so that makes sense. This one was a project that was actually based on a social problem we were having at school, where we had a fair number of students, not necessarily bullying, but a lot of teasing based on stereotypes. And a teacher got really angry about it, and I encouraged her to turn it into a project. So this became an interdisciplinary project that included English, social studies, STEAM, which is how they were learning about the photography elements through STEAM. And I think there was at least one other discipline involved. In this project, they were really looking closely at the way that stereotypes divide us and what they're based on or not based on. And students did a lot of work around understanding themselves and understanding the way that they might be stereotyping others in order to really be able to break some of those stereotypes. It was a really cool project that I think a lot of us really enjoyed and learned something from. This one came from high school. This is an interdisciplinary project as well. Does history change science, or does science change history? While this is not a driving question that sounds like it's going to invite more than a yes or no answer or one or the other answer, the truth is that the teachers knew that, and they designed this question very specifically because they believe that the two are interrelated. And so what students were exploring history and understanding how scientific achievements had impacted impacted history, but they also looked at the way that history impulsed those scientific achievements. So it was really always sort of a combination of both. At the end of the project, all of the students created products where they tried to use their scientific learning and their scientific understandings to create a change, something that would change history. And it was a neat project and really motivating. This was 9th grade, what would be 10th grade in the United States. This project actually is one that many of you probably are familiar with because it comes from iron, and it's the Machinto project. This is a great project that we used we did it in kindergarten, I believe it was 5th grade, and then also in 9th grade. So for the kindergartners, it was all about making friends, right? How being friendly and using our values and understanding other people can transform daily actions into actions of peace. At the 5th grade level, they were really starting to understand some of the challenges of the atomic bomb in Hiroshima, and were looking at in a light way, at least, at parallels between that war and the war in Colombia, and looking at how to make sure that we don't end up in the same situation. And then in the 9th grade level, of course, at an even deeper level, what would be US 10th, students were really exploring very deeply those connections, like what can we learn from Hiroshima that can allow us to improve the peace process and build peace in Colombia. We also have 3 really stellar projects, entrepreneurship projects that we do in the high school in 8th, 9th, and 10th grade, or 9th, 10th, and 11th in US terms. The first one is a more general one. The second has a bit of a focus on human rights, and the third has a focus on sustainability. And some really extraordinary products have come out of this work. A few quick examples. A student of ours created a video game designed to teach young people with Down syndrome how to manage traffic in an urban setting. So when to cross the street and when not to, what the different signals mean, all of those kinds of things to ensure that young people would be able to move around in the city safely. Another group of students created a drone that would allow us to find chemical plastic landmines in the country, locate them, determine whether there were dangers in the area, plot them on a GPS map for cleanup, and in some cases actually explode them right there. And then another that came out this year, which I'm very proud of, is a young person who developed a telephone application designed to allow the client to find businesses that use green practices. And what he said to me, and in his presentations, he's won several different awards for this innovation, and it'll be in production. It'll be available on the market soon. But what he said to me was that one part of his intention was the service to the client, because he really wanted to make sure that people who wanted to practice green living knew where they could go and which companies or organizations to shop with. But then he also wanted to create a pressure on the businesses themselves, that they had to change their practices. They had to start doing some of this to be able to get the business that they wanted, right? And to be able to appear on the app. So strategies. I will say this first strategy was probably the hardest to develop from my perspective, but it was the strategy of using intentional messaging to and constructive involvement of our stakeholders. And when I say stakeholders, I really do mean parents more than anybody else. The first strategy that we used to really make sure that they understood what we were trying to do and that they were involved in it in a constructive way, as opposed to a destructive, why don't you go back to traditional educating kind of way, was to start what we call the Café con la Rectora. So this is something that I started my first year there. I meet with parents once a month. The first year it was purely a complaint session, and I would come out with my cuticles torn to bits and my nails bitten, and it was awful. And we quickly learned at the end of that year that it needed to be redesigned. And so what we did was we redesigned it in a PBL fashion. And so now every month the parents come together with me and we deal with problems and challenges that they're dealing with at home, or issues that matter to them that they're seeing at home. For example, last month we looked at how they could be supporting bilingualism from home. We've done things around the social pressures of social media and how to help their students in middle school ages, things like that, to really understand how to navigate and avoid the dangers of social media. As you can see from the photograph here, parents, these are always collaborative workshops. They are always PBL style in design, and the parents really are solving their own problem for themselves. And it's been incredibly successful, whereas we have a very difficult time drawing parents in for events in general. What we found was that the Café con la Rectora can easily pull 50 to 75 parents every single month. The second one is Escuela para Padres, or School for Parents. This is a program that's run by our Parents Association. And this year, for example, they're putting on 3 different workshops for each of our sections. So 3 for elementary, 3 for middle, and 3 for high school. And this year they're focused on, they're being taught by a psychologist who's also a mother at the school, who has an incredible background. So and we're working on social challenges and child raising challenges. So the junior school parents are focusing a lot on the talks or the workshops are focusing a lot on what it means to raise happy, healthy, values-based young people who know how to treat other people well. Middle school, they're talking about social media and all those things that are starting to pop up in the lives of preteens, and how to help them through all of those social pressures and things, and the peer pressure and all of that. And then at the high school level, we're looking at substance abuse, alcohol, drugs, how to help your students understand how to keep themselves safe in those ways, in terms of sex, in terms of a lot of different topics. So they've been really successful. This year, I feel like, is the first year that we've been truly successful at making Escuela para Padres really work. In terms of communication and messaging, What's News is something that we put out regularly on social media. These are short films. These are photos recognizing a kid who won an award for something. We put out about 1 film a week, one-minute film a week, as well as lots and lots of news posts on Facebook and Instagram and all of that. And part of it is a marketing strategy, but and a messaging strategy to parents. But another part of it really is about the pride, that a parent feels when they see these amazing things that are going on. So it's no longer, oh, I'm at this school that's a little different and maybe a little weird, and I'm not sure how I feel about it. And nobody else seems to be doing it, so I'm being quiet about it. And it helps them shift toward, look how lucky I am that I get to be a part of a school that's doing something different. Look at these amazing things that our kids are doing. It really helps to shift the mindset, in my experience. And then finally, we have the School of 600 Teachers. This is an initiative that we started to really try to get the parents involved in more constructive ways. So we now have a database of about 600 parents who are willing to come in and support the work that we're doing in the classroom, and in the exhibits and all those kinds of things. So they often come in as experts at different points along the way in a project. And the mom who's a doctor comes in for body systems in primary school. The parent who's a business owner comes in and helps the entrepreneurship programs. All of these kinds of supports allow the parents to better understand what we're trying to do and to be involved in our doing it. Second strategy is to offer transformative professional development. So it can't just be professional development where you learn, the first step is this, the second step is that, et cetera, because we have to change their minds and their hearts so much and get them thinking really differently about what teaching looks like. And that's with almost no experience, right? So we are really trying to make sure that all of the professional development is based in project-based learning, that it's oriented toward practice and growth and it being okay to make mistakes and learn from them and try again. And really trying to make these experiences where teachers will say, you know what, I know how I felt as a learner in this situation, so now I better understand why I can make these kinds of choices in my own classroom as well. And we have to really make it very visible and very transparent consistently that that's what we're doing, so that they will then take the strategies back to their own classrooms. And then finally, we're doing something really different with professional development in that our teachers are doing rubrics, are creating portfolios. That means they are asked to observe 4 classes of their colleagues in the course of the year, 1 in each section, and then a 4th that they can do wherever they prefer. The idea is not to evaluate their peers, but just to learn from them, to soak up everything that they experience in those classrooms, and to use what's useful. And then they're also asked to do a lot of self-reflection over their own growth using 2 key rubrics from the Buck Institute, translated into Spanish, obviously, the teaching practices rubric and the project design rubric, which they use for self-reflection and include that in their portfolio. And then finally, they also we've been working really hard on PLCs, on professional learning communities. It has not been incredibly successful so far because of an issue of time, I think, more than anything. But it is something that we're working that I hope to see more and more of. Of course, one of the biggest advantages of using portfolios is that this year we're starting to use student portfolios as well in a few grade levels, and having the teachers experience it first will help it makes it much easier to convince them that this is something worth doing. Third strategy is to embrace the middle path. This is a term that comes from Buddhism and that I embrace in almost everything that I do in my life. It doesn't have to do with compromise. It has to do with there being a middle path, which is most effective because it doesn't represent either of the 2 extremes, but is right in the middle, uniting them, as you can see in the image there, in a way that makes sense. So that includes meeting traditional expectations through project-based learning, right? Making sure that the projects really do help us meet those more traditional expectations. And that includes being able to show their results, students learning in traditional ways as much as in more innovative ways. So for example, at the end of a given trimester, students will do an exhibition of learning, a celebration of learning, right, where they'll show these wonderful products that they've created during the course of the trimester. But they'll also often take an exam that allows us to check and see whether they're learning what they're supposed to be learning effectively enough, and that prepares them for traditional exams in the future as well. And finally, I mean, I would say that the goal of all of this strategy really is, how do we ensure success in all contexts, right? How do we make sure that that kids, that the student who goes on to the most traditional university in the world is going to be incredibly successful in these lecture style courses for 4 years, but the kid who wants to go to the most progressive school in the world can also be incredibly successful. That the student who wants to take a more traditional path and work in a big company for their whole lives knows how to do that and can do it well, but the kid who wants to break out and create a new industry can do that too, right? It's all about ensuring the highest level of success possible in any context. I do want to go a little deeper into the exam conundrum and how we're addressing that without destroying the project-based environment. So the first thing is that we're using exam style language in all of our formal assessments in high school. So that means that at the end of each trimester, when they do exams for the different disciplines, we're using the same language or question style that's used in the national exams. And that allows us, without having to do a lot of drill and kill or hours and years of practice exams, we're getting them ready for and used to the language. We've also made major improvements to our scope and sequence to ensure better alignment with the ministry, because we absolutely recognize that without that, we can't hope to ensure those high-level exam skills. So the better the alignment, the less likely it is that there are going to be holes that will only appear suddenly on a test, where the kid never learned that because our projects were fun and lovely, but they weren't well enough aligned with the national curriculum to ensure that they would do well. We also have, we've decided to adopt international English standards because the ministry's expectation for English learning is not based on a bilingual environment. We really want our students to come out with English skills of almost as strong as their first language, or if possible, as strong. And so we've chosen a set of standards that will allow us to mirror basically the level that happens in Spanish as well in their native tongue. We have shifted this year toward a really important emphasis on data and instruction, and really making good, effective use of data to adjust instruction. This is not something that the teachers necessarily have a lot of experience with, and it's something that it's definitely an interesting challenge, but we know that it's going to help us make sure that we really are filling gaps when they appear, and that we're adjusting our instruction to meet those needs. And then finally, we also came up with a 2-year plan that we're in the first year of right now, where we're going to see a little less project-based learning in junior and senior year. We do believe that over 2 years, we can get to the point where we know that all of our curricular gaps, all the gaps that I inherited, are gone. And at that point, we'll be able to really do PBL across the entire school. The fourth strategy is developing strategic global and local partnerships. And these have been really essential. And I have to really give a shout out to every university and program we've been connected with, because it's made such a huge difference for us. The first is the university alliances. This helps us make sure that the teachers that we receive are more and more prepared. So we receive a lot of they call them practicantes, student teachers at Kaobos, and we would love to have one in almost every classroom. We have no problem with the work involved. We would love to be more involved in the training of these teachers. I also teach some university courses in Bogota to make sure that university, that pre-service teachers get some exposure to project-based learning, but then also we've been doing some of that work with university professors as well, because we want our students to have a good experience when they get to those universities. And that, I think, is one of the keys, is that these universities recognizing we're not going to stay relevant if we don't shift with schools like Kaobos. So we've been working really hard on that. We do a big conference every 2 years on campus. We involve the universities and lots of other schools in that conference because it's all about sharing the learning. We even give scholarships for public school employees who want to come and be part of it, because there are so many ways to do this work. And maybe at the end, I'll respond to some of these questions too, if that sounds good to you guys. I'd like to make sure that I complete the talk, but I absolutely see some great questions there that I do want to respond to if I can. We are also, partnerships with local and global entrepreneurs and experts and organizations that can help create opportunities for our students, as well as growth experiences for our teachers. The support of local business people and entrepreneurs has been incredibly important. Entrepreneurship is alive and well in Colombia. I think there's a very clear recognition that innovation is the key to the future of this country. So it's been really gratifying to make use of those kinds of connections. And then, of course, the global partnerships for learning. I mean, I think this year we have about 10 major global projects going on, which is a lot for a school that had almost none when I arrived. And it's been a long learning curve. As the global education expert on campus, I'm running the school. I don't have a whole lot of time to support the work, on the ground level with the teachers. And so we've been doing some, a lot of creative things and really finding ways to improve those experiences for kids, so that it's not just learning in isolation inside the schoolhouse or even inside of Columbia. One really great example of that, of course, is the work that we've done with Terry Godwalt's organization in Edmonton, the Center for Global Education. We were able to send students to the IPCC my first year to represent Columbia in those climate change talks. We sent students to Poland last year for COP as well, but also did online work with younger students who maybe weren't going to get to travel through the programming that Terry offers. And then this year we'll be going to Spain, the new shift of country, but we will be going to Spain. So those kinds of experiences where kids get to really represent youth voice have been incredibly helpful. And this is just one example of that. And the last strategy, which I think is so important, is that we've been empowering student voice in the change process. I learned this lesson very early in my career, and it was Judith Bannon actually at St. Mary's Academy who taught me this lesson. And that is that when we empower student voice, when the change comes from the kids themselves, we actually really do accomplish a lot more quickly. When it comes from the adults, sometimes there's a perception that we're pushing something on the kids. But when it comes from the kids, it's authentic. It has to be done because the kids know that it has to be done, and it's allowed us to take on some of the hardest social issues you can imagine. The student you see in this picture is a young woman who came to us at the beginning of high school. She wasn't with us from 4 years old up. She came to us because she was suffering her education in a rigorous environment and didn't want to be there anymore, and came to Kaobos. And she got to go to the IPCC in Edmonton and was actively involved in our environmental club. And ultimately, what you see behind her, which is a wall of there's information about how to recycle and why we should recycle, but there are also bins for the tops of bottles, the plastic tops. There's a bin for batteries. There are bins for obviously all the different types of traditional recycling. And then right behind her, blocked by her in this image, is a water filling station, one of the kinds that tells you how many water bottles you've saved from the environment. I went around and checked before I gave this talk, and we are at about 15,000 bottles saved from the environment in just 6 months of having 2 of these dispensers on campus. And that would never have happened without this student. She figured out how to raise the money. She figured out where to put them, which organizations would come collect things from the different bins. And then she graduated. So she left us with this legacy. So that's an example of the senior capstone project at the bottom of my list there, my community, my passion. We also make sure that our student government isn't just in name only. We really do try to make sure that they have true power in the sense that there is student representation in most of our committees and in most of our decision-making processes. Lots of projects like the one about stereotypes that are geared toward the community and to improving our relationships and our culture on campus. And that's been incredibly, incredibly successful as well at really helping us to get the kids involved at the ground floor. So I used that example earlier of breaking stereotypes. And I told you guys that was a teacher who was brand new to us and super pissed off to find that kids were being mean to each other. And the boys were calling each other girls and, sissy and all this kind of gender oriented, using feminine adjectives, right, to describe the boys, things like that were stereotypical and bad behavior. And by shifting that, oh, I'm so angry at this, it makes me so mad, to how could I create a project that would address it, where the kids are going to solve the problem for me. It's the same thing that I did with Café con la Rectora, right, where I stopped letting them just complain. And I said, okay, so how would you solve this problem? Let's get you involved in it. And it made all the difference. So I really do think that student voice is the key. I think in a lot of schools, unfortunately, student voice is very tokenistic. And I invite any of you who are leaders to really think about ways that students could become more centrally and authentically involved in your processes and could really help you to build something even better. I will mention that all of the material that I've shared today and more detail is in a chapter that I wrote for this book, which just came out last month, edited by Jason Richardson. The whole book is exceptional. There are some really extraordinary stories from all over the world of schools that are doing innovative things on an international level. And I certainly encourage you to take a look. I'm certainly, my story is in there. You've heard most of my story right here, but I hope that these are valuable, that all the chapters and vignettes are really valuable to educators and leaders who are trying to do something different in a variety of contexts. I want to end, and then I will come back to the questions after this. If that sounds good, I'll wrap up and then go to the questions. I want to end on the words of Boyan Slat. Some of you may have heard of him. He's a young Dutchman who created a system for getting the plastic out of the garbage patches of the oceans around the world. His first pilot is in place, as far as I know, in the Pacific garbage patch right now. And one of the things that he says, and he's, I think, 21 or 22, youngest ever recipient of the UNEP Champions of the Earth award. One of the things he said has really stuck with me, and he says it in several of his talks. He says that history is basically a list of things that couldn't be done, and then were done. And I really want to invite everyone in this audience to think about what that might mean for your schools and your classrooms. I think there are a few things that are important to point out. The first would be that we often, without ever meaning to, just completely squash the innovative ideas of young people in our environments when they say, what if we, and we say, oh, that's impossible. And in those moments, I suspect that we're shutting off something that could become real, that could really make a difference. So I really think on a basic level that all teachers have to stop saying that's impossible and say, ooh, that sounds challenging and wonderful. How might we do it? Instead of that's impossible. But the other thing is in the school itself and in the way that we teach and educate and the way we think about learning and educating, especially in private schools where we're worried about making sure that we get the students necessary to keep afloat and keep the ship moving, that it can often feel like we should just go back to the way that things have always been done. There's a comfort in the way that things have always been done. And there's a lot that's unknown and fearful in trying something different. But history is basically a list of things that couldn't be done and then were done. There's nothing to suggest that these movements in education are impossible. And there's nothing in my environment, certainly in Columbia, that suggests that this is not the way to educate young people. It's scary and it's very, very new for the context that I'm in, but perhaps that makes it even more important than we do it. So I want to close by just thanking all of you for being a part of this. I do want to say, as always, that I love this kind of work. It's been the hardest job I've ever had, no question. It's been a very, very difficult place for me to be, and very difficult work for me to do. But I'm seeing the results. I am seeing the rewards. Kids understand why it matters, and we're really getting somewhere now. And I know that the people who work with me, the teachers, the administrators, the people who are on the ground level really making this work happen, believe in what we're doing, and the parents too. We're really getting to that point now where I can say, okay, I don't see parents and want to flee. I want to go up and give them a kiss on the cheek and hear something good from them. So I'm here and available. I'm glad to help schools around the world, particularly in Latin America, but honestly anywhere. If you're interested in training your teachers or doing work with your leaders, I love to support this work. I believe it's the future. I was inspired as a child by Arnie to believe that I could create change through this kind of work. And I want to thank all of you for being here and being part of it. I'm going to go to the questions now. Steve, it's up to you if you want to keep filming or not, but I know that
Oh,
there
yeah.
were a few.
In fact, we almost kind of have to stop so people
Okay.
can go to the next set of sessions.
Okay.
Awesome job. Way to go.
Thank you. It was my pleasure, you guys. I'm sorry I didn't get to the questions. I'll read through all the comments. I'll follow up with a few of you afterwards. Thank you all so much from my heart for being a part of this session tonight. It's my pleasure to share the experience we've had. Thank you all.
Okay, so if you want to be able to read through the comments, I'm not going to close the room.
Okay.
Leave it open, and then in about 20 minutes, I'll close it.
Perfect. Thank you, Steve. I appreciate it.
I'm going off to another session. See ya.
All right. Sounds good. Thank you,
Nice
Steve.
job.
Thank you. I'm going to take a look at these, and if anybody wants to stick around to answer or to ask questions specifically. Oh, thank you, Kristen. I felt like my Spanish session was a mess, but I'm really glad. And good. Thank you for sharing it. We are in the Iron Latina listserv as well, but hopefully some will watch later. Seeing some highs from people. Oh, this is great. Thank you. Peggy, so good to see you here. Oh yeah, you are still in the room. Thank you for being here, Peggy. It's great to see your name on the list. Yeah, Peggy, very sad to see that the universities won't accept portfolios. I think we're going to get there, though. You know, as soon as we have the first set of student portfolios, my plan is to go over to a bunch of the universities and talk to the rectors and share some really stellar ones and see if we can create some change just by showing them how ridiculously awesome they are and how much more they show about who a kid really is. Janice, we have the same effect in schools with low test scores. Yeah, isn't it interesting? They get more rigid when things are bad, right? Even though the best schools get more innovative when things go well. That seems like a really weird conundrum to me, right? I agree with that completely. I think it's a real mistake. But there is something. I think it's fear-based. I think we just, we batten down the hatches, as you said, because we think that there must be something more accurate about or more effective about a drill and kill as opposed to something more student-centered. Teachers loving. That's nice of you, Bob. My pleasure. Elementary school. Yes, I know. Yeah, I agree. And that's so Janice, I don't know if you're still in the room or not, but I agree that there could be a really interesting conundrum there because elementary school teachers love kids. And so they're often much better teachers in a lot of ways because they've been trained in childhood development, right? More than anything else. But they're often missing the content pieces. And then we've got the opposite problem at the high school level. We've got the content, but not necessarily the teaching practices, which can be incredibly difficult too. Let's see. Yeah, the tuition piece, Peggy, I've never seen it anyplace either, as this is the first place in the world that I've seen that piece. I guess it makes sense with the public schools on some level, but not, no, and it doesn't really make sense on any level. I mean, yeah, you can charge more at a really good school. Yeah, I guess so, right? But that the percentage of increase would be determined by the government based on our scores strikes me as very limited in the way they're thinking about education and what success looks like. I'd much rather that if the government's going to get involved in our costs, I would much rather that they came and observed classes for 2 days or something. Do you know what I mean? And judged our quality based on that, or looked at our portfolios alongside, I don't know, something like that, right? So that they could really get that bigger picture. Oh, I'm so glad that the vigor rigor distinction was clear. There is a piece about that on my blog at principledlearning.org. It's a bit old, but it's still true to my thinking. Assessment. Yes, yeah, I think that, thank you, Ross. I don't know if Ross is still here. That would be kind of awesome, but it looks like he's probably gone. But yeah, we making those kinds of shifts has been really important. Let's see, entrepreneurship. Thank you all. I hope you enjoyed what I had to say. I know I saw some questions. So Peggy, you said, do you have a way to assess changes in attitude by the parents from when they first come to the training and after they've been in the program? Is there less resistance now? You know, I have never been a really data-based educator. And so this is one of your question reveals my Achilles heel, which is that I wasn't trained that way as an educator. And so I'm learning a great deal right now. We do surveys of the parents every year. In the past 2 years, we've done 2 a year. And those surveys have given us at least some sense of the changes in attitude among our teachers, as much as among our students and among our parents, the parents being the key here, right? Beyond that, I would say and we are seeing changes, and that's good. I suppose the other way to measure change would be how many families have left. I hate to say it that way, but I do think that at the end of my first year, we lost a bunch of families who didn't belong at the school because they didn't believe in it and they didn't think it was going to work or was possible. So maybe that's just the natural progression of things. It's unfortunate, right? I would have liked to have kept every single family, but I also we didn't need to spend our energy fighting with parents about whether this was the right way to do it. So to some degree, a toxic family should probably move on, right? Beyond that, I would say most of it is anecdotal. I mean, I know that I get a huge attendance at it's not huge for a school of 600 kids, but it's huge for Caobos with the Bogota traffic the way it is, to have 50 to 75 parents show up for the cafes every month. I think by itself shows that they're shifting in their thinking, and that they're getting it, and lots of parents will come to see me at the exhibits and say, oh, my kid is so happy, and I'm starting to really understand that happy is good as opposed to bad. So most of the evidence is anecdotal, but that's one of the goals that I have over the next year is to try to really incorporate more use of data and try to improve the kinds of survey questions and what we can learn from polling our parents. Let's see, some nice compliments. Thank you, guys. And yeah, the middle path is really key. Let's see, is it possible to get more information about your collaboration with universities concerning teacher preparation? Just curious if I can get a written description of it. This is Hadil. I don't know, Hadil, if you're still here, but if you are, I will say the chapter has a bit more information about it, but I think I may also write some other papers on it. So I'll try to get out some more word about how one might do that. I can't say that it's been a really structured effort, but it's definitely been a useful one. And we've been able to make some really cool things happen because of it. It was more just my instinct about what would be the right way to go about it, sitting down in conversations with rectors of the various universities. And I will say too, when I first arrived, I thought it was just a nuisance that all these rectors kept calling me and trying to set up appointments with me. And within about 3 months, I realized, oh, this is not a nuisance at all. I need to be making more use of it because these are my allies in all of this. Student voice, yes, absolutely. Oh, thank you, Peggy, for sharing the link to the book. I appreciate that. I think it's going to be good. I haven't received my own copy of it yet. But I'm here in Denver, so I'm going to get to pick it up this week. I was directed to your school website to understand the structure that you work on. Lots of ideas. Great. I'm glad to see that people are getting good stuff. Well, and actually, you know what I forgot to tell you guys was everybody's welcome. Like, I really want to receive delegations of teachers, and leaders. Please come on in, like come down, come visit us. It's a very safe country to be in spite of what the news might say. So please come visit if it's useful. Any of you who would like to see what we're trying to do. So somebody here is saying, so you changed the traditional school into an open class school, not a community school. I'm not sure, Maha, exactly what you meant by that question. So if you can say more, looks like you are still here. I mean, I would say it's both. I think it is a community school. I talked about my own education in open school being part of my formation, right? Part of what grounds me and the way I think about education. But that doesn't mean that it's not a community school, because we do really work very hard to incorporate community and connections to community. One of the challenges is that we're to the north of the city, though, and we have really, really bad traffic problems. And so the new challenge is, how do we involve community without their having to drive, when we know that the drive can be as much as 2 hours to get, 10, 15 kilometers. So very, very challenging to incorporate more community, but it's definitely something we want to be able to do. The teaching rubrics that I mentioned, is Judy still here? Those are both on the website. Yeah, Judy, I see that you are still here. The rubrics that we use are available on the Buck Institute website. I think they changed their URL, but you can still get to it by bie.org. And there you can find, it's the teaching practices. And the other one is project design. And we use both of them in translation with the teachers for reflection. And it's been quite successful so far. Maha, I see your question again here, so I hope I managed to answer it. Let's see. Sorry, it takes me a minute to look through. Yeah, Peggy, I agree. It doesn't have to be hardcore scientific data, but I'm so, as a growing up as a literature student, I think it was I was always just more geared toward the anecdotal than I was toward the quantitative, right? And so I think that's my challenge now, is just to make it a bit more quantitative, so we know what we're looking at. And it's not just, I have this impression based on stories that have been shared. Is there a research paper? No, there isn't. It's the next step for me. I mean, my chapter in the book could be described as a research paper, but they were much more focused on, in fact, my first drafts were much more academic, and then they asked me to tone it down. So it's something that I think I would like to continue to work on, and build up a bit more. Let's see here. But there isn't one right now anyway. The book's on Kindle, good. So Maha, you're saying an open class school or based on PBL to stick to exams as well. I see what you're saying. Yeah, for now, I guess then we're the open class school, based on those definitions that you're offering there, Maha. I think right now, I mean, honestly, I would have done away with exams by now if I could. And that was very much my goal in the first year, was to see if we could. And I encouraged lowering the emphasis on exams. And in the long run, I'd love to move away from exams as well. But for as long as we have this, as long as our national exam does still determine as much as it does, I think we would be putting our students and ourselves at risk, to be quite honest with you. And my concern is not as much with the well-being of the school. Well, my concern is obviously with the well-being of the school, but the most important concern is, are we teaching kids and preparing them in ways that ensure that they'll be successful? And the bottom line is that this country still works this way. The Columbia is still a very traditional system, and I don't want to put at risk my students' well-being at the university level to get rid of exams. I'm not sure that would be responsible of us to try to do. But if you ask me in 10 years, what do I imagine? Absolutely. I would love to see us do away completely with the exams. But I would also love to see us be able to say no to the exams on the national level. I refuse to take the SATs myself because of the kind of education I received. And I wrote my entrance essay for Bard College on why an experiential education couldn't be captured through a standardized test. So there's no question that in terms of my vision, I would love to be able to get them there. But I also have learned in 2.5 years that I have to be really conscious of and respectful even of where my community is. And I can't move them too fast. And I can't do anything in terms of change at the school that could potentially really just, screw up our kids, screw up their future within this context, right? But I agree with you completely. I mean, the question sounds like it's coming from where I'm coming from, which is I would love to do away with exams. And we really only do heavy duty exams at the high school level. We're really trying to do much more formative, authentic assessment as consistently as possible at all levels. Frankly, there should be a lot of authentic assessment happening inside of high school as well, through the projects and through other kinds of formative assessments. But we have to be realistic about the exam context too, and that's really important. All right. Well, thank you guys. I appreciate it. I think I got to the end of the questions. I love that so many of you stuck around for so long. That makes me really happy. I hope you all have a wonderful evening. I don't know if there are other questions, but thank you so much. I really loved getting to chat with you guys. I hope they filmed this part too. I don't know if he stopped the recording when he left, but yeah, my pleasure, Peggy. Really loved it. Thank you all for being a part of it. It's very gratifying to be able to share this work with others. So thank you guys so much. Oh, thank you, Judy, for sharing those links too. That's great to see. Thank you. Thank you guys for your comments and questions. I really appreciate it. Oh, Judy, thank you so much for sharing that at the end there. I'm just starting to close things out here, but I just saw your message. And thank you guys for sharing the rubrics and all of that. Oh, that's great. So you got to start your day this way, and I'm closing out my day this way. That's awesome. We'll have a wonderful day, Judy. I hope it's a great one. I'm going to go ahead and stop my video and all that. And yeah, thank you guys. See you.